So we are currently live on Facebook and YouTube. If you are joining us, this is YAFO Institute Policy Dialogue Series for 2024. Tonight, we are discussing the topic Free Market in Climate Policy. How effective is Ghana's emission tax? Joining us for this discussion is our guest speaker, Dr. Julian Baum. And we'll also introduce our panelists as we go on. So without much ado, let me introduce our guest speaker to give us a presentation, then followed by introduction of our panelists, and then we'll do the panel discussion as well. So Dr. Julian Baum is the founder of the PLC Network and the Conservation Economic Consultant. She developed her passion for sociological systems thinking and storytelling in South Africa during her doctorate research and subsequently the diverse entrepreneurial endeavor, especially when engaging with stakeholders for conservation impact, sorry. She is striving to implement functioning conservation economies that are transformative and inclusive. Dr. Julia has published several scientific articles on this topic. Tonight, we are blessed to have her as part of our discussion. If you are joining us and this is the first time you are hearing about YAFO Institute, YAFO Institute is an independent public policy research organization or think tank with core aim to promote libertarian ideas and free market research through public policy debate and advocacy for a freer and prosperous society in Ghana. At this juncture, I'll welcome Dr. Julia to give us the presentation. Thank you very much. Dr. Julia.
Yes, thank you so much, Nathaniel, for your lovely introduction. And let me quickly share my screen. This should be fine. Can you all see my screen now? Is that sharing in full slideshow?
Yeah, it is sharing in full.
In full, okay, because I can see this differently. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Very interesting and very recent and relevant topic around an emissions tax, looking at carbon and carbon emissions in Ghana and then obviously also globally. So I am aiming to give you a bit of an introduction to set the scene for this discussion. Nathaniel introduced me already. I am calling in from Germany tonight. I am German. I grew up here and studied geoecology and then did a further education in business administration as well. And then I lived in South Africa from 2012 to 2022 and did my PhD there. And that was explicitly on private land conservation. So as you can see, I come from very much from the ecology and the conservation background. And yeah, I do have a very strong passion for new models in conservation and sustainability, especially through entrepreneurship. And that's why I'm usually working with the term of a conservation economy. So I'm very fascinated by combining nature conservation, but also beyond that towards sustainability with business, and how can business and entrepreneurship have an impact in that or contribute to that. And then very recently, since January, I'm working as a website consultant for the African Futures and Innovations program. That's a program at the Institute for Security Studies in South Africa. And so I'm getting more and more involved in thinking around geopolitics and development, which I think is of great help now tonight. So today's storyline in my little talk will be basically going along two questions. What is climate change? And then also, how does that relate to the free market? Let's dive a bit into that. I picked a quote from the UN and the IPCC report, and it terms climate change to be a large-scale, long-term shift in the planet's weather patterns and average temperatures. And this is accelerated by human contributions since the mid-1800s through the release of carbon dioxide, but also other greenhouse gases. So this is what we're talking about, a shift in weather patterns and average temperatures, and largely caused by human contributions. And therefore, the UN calls for every government to reassess their energy policy. You may see that I underlined energy because we are going to get back to that topic. Let's look at climate change in Africa. Africa has actually historically been a region that contributed very little to the climate crisis because it's always been a small emitter. We're getting to that now. However, it now bears a disproportionate burden of severe climate change impacts. And these include, most of you will know this very well from all the news, rising temperatures and extreme weather events. But climate change and its impacts doesn't stop there. So we are actually also speaking about health challenges. For example, respiratory diseases caused by pollution, by air pollution, or the spread of pathogens through rising temperatures, for example. You can look at diminished food production. You can hear a lot about water stress. So it could be droughts, but it could also be extreme rainfalls or anything like that. And then we're also getting to climate-induced displacement of people from some of these weather extremes, for example. So all of those impacts are actually climate change. It's not only the temperatures and the storms. And these impacts foster potential conflict and insecurity on the entire continent. And as we already said, climate change is definitely accelerated by carbon emissions, which is our key topic today. And these carbon emissions stem from diverse human activities and sectors. For example, land use in agriculture or through deforestation, in the manufacturing sector, in transport, and then again, key topic in energy production, for example, through coal burning. So let's look a bit more at carbon emissions in Africa. As I said already, Africa is a minor carbon contributor. It only emits less than 500 million tons annually. And that means less than 5% of global emissions. So your entire continent only contributes around 5% to the global budget, so to say. And then what the AFI team found is that 4 countries are responsible for these emissions, well, for 70% of the continent's emissions from fossil fuels. And in 2023, that would have been South Africa at first, and then Egypt, and then followed by Nigeria and Algeria. So the question then is, how does climate relate to economy, and why are we actually even talking about this tonight? Overall, Africa needs an energy transition towards more renewables, and that's according to those international climate targets that we are talking about, and that the UN is calling for, and that the international community is calling for. But also to further achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for nature and for people. However, if you look at Africa needing an energy transition and doing all of these things, a bit more realistically speaking, how about supply and demand gaps? How about your import and export dynamics? What about your situation around economic growth? And that's where the economic and the economy thinking comes in. Now we're getting into Ghana, and we're talking about Ghana's emissions tax tonight. What is your country's context? You're actually having a very similar challenge to what I phrased for the entire continent of Africa. Around 57% of your citizens are living in urban areas, and this is projected to increase to 68% already by 2043. That's in another 20 years from now. That now means that your fossil fuel dependency is growing rapidly. So you're having efforts at electrification, but we're also looking at problems such as energy inefficiencies, and you will have much higher industrial activities overall. So that again means that your annual carbon emissions are increasing and will be increasing. So if we look at, they raised from 2 million tons in 2011 to double, or more than double, to 4.5 million in 2019. That's less than 10 years. And even though you might be looking at a shift to renewable energy sources, your emissions are forecasted to reach 18.6 million tons in 20 years' time. So that's where we're coming from when we look at the climate change debate and rising carbon emissions and having to reduce them. And this now is where your emissions tax very recently came in. So your emissions tax now is one effort to possibly offer solutions. So let's look at a few pros of such tax-based policies, right? They can incentivize reductions in emissions. For example, they can raise awareness of all of these climate challenges in your population, right? If people don't know what we're talking about, then probably very soon they will, because now suddenly there's this emissions tax that they have to pay. And that's not only in your industries and your, say, main manufacturing or anything like that, the bigger sectors and the bigger companies, it's your citizens, right? It's for vehicles as well. So such a tax may actually alter consumer and producer behavior. And then quite obviously, it helps to generate government revenue. It's income for your government and your offices to then also fund some climate change mitigation, for example, some environmental projects. However, there are obviously some cons. Usually there's two sides to a story. So if we now look at your emissions tax possibly being problematic, and I hope we will discuss this much more later with our panelists, for example, it can create a financial burden on low-income households. This is a very individual problem, maybe. Then it could increase the risk of businesses that would then relocate to other countries that have laxer regulations. So you're just outsourcing your industries. Or it could have impacts on economic sectors in diverse ways. For example, through rising costs of production, you may lay off people, so you would have a loss of employment. What are the alternatives? Many more free market tools. And again, hopefully we can discuss this a bit more later. And what we mean with free market tools is creating economic incentives for reducing emissions and investing in sustainable practices, rather than relying only on regulatory mandates. So, for example, you could implement a carbon cap and trade system. That means you offer a limited emissions allowance and then have to basically trade your allowances and buy in what you emitted more if you are a company, for example. Then we have voluntary carbon markets, where a company, even an individual, can buy offsets or credits, carbon credits and offsets, to sort of like pay off for their own emissions. There are many diverse green bonds out there that basically are investments and finance for green initiatives, for example, for bigger reforestation projects. Then society can deal with something like eco-labeling and consumer choice, where you can highlight on your packaging, for example, of products, whether they are climate friendly or not. I don't know, I think some countries are very specific with this already. And then with some, it's a rather broad certificate or label. And I'm not sure if that actually helps too much. And then a last example I brought up was research and development incentives. So where, for example, government or other grants could incentivize looking at innovative technologies for carbon reductions. Overall, just to summarize a little bit, climate change challenges as well as their causes are all interconnected. So we do actually need diversified mitigation and adaptation. It's beyond a tax, but let's discuss this more. And then my two key questions around your tax: does it offer a sufficient long-term solution, or are your emitters actually just paying for their pollution but not reducing it? In my opinion, as a summary, a tax is a valid instrument, but as part of an overarching strategy. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Julia. We are grateful for these insights. So you stop sharing?
Yes.
Just
Is that
great.
fine?
Yeah, it's very fine. So for this juncture, we'll introduce our panelists, and then we start the panel discussion and put a bit of context to the emission tax in Ghana.
Right.
So joining Dr. Julia on the panel will be Asamoah Kweku Jr. Asamoah holds a bachelor degree in economics from the University of Kwame Nkrumah, University of Science and Technology. He's a researcher at the Center for Economic Freedom Policy and a policy scholar at the Yafo Institute as well. He has engaged in free market training. A typical example is the African Journalist for Economic Opportunity Training. He is also a development manager at the Yafo Institute and leads with the entire team to oversee good projects by creating development plans and identifying market opportunities. The next on the panel is Justin Campaign. He is currently making significant contribution as a senior research assistant at Yafo Institute for both the Center for Economic Freedom Policy and Development and the Center for Public Health, Education, and Poverty Reduction. So my panelists, Asamoah Kweku Jr. and Justine, you are welcome to join Dr. Julia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll start with Asamoah. When we say emission tax, let us understand emission tax from the taxman point of view. What is it? What is it about?
Okay, thank you very much. Can you please hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so when we talk about emission tax, some people actually call it, other countries have classified it as carbon tax. So what the emission tax is, mostly when you look at cars, you see the smokes that come from the cars during manufacturing and other factories too, when they are producing. These are the chemicals that come out. We have carbon dioxide, which is part of the emissions. We have nitrogen and other ones. So these are, in a way, a problem in affecting the climate that we have. So in this sense, it actually causes so many respiratory diseases when we have these climate being disturbed. So these are some of the things that emission is about. So emission tax is when a government, decide to place some form of levy on these fumes or these smokes that are coming out of factories or cars. In this aspect, most countries do say that um, proposing these kind of emission tax or carbon tax is in the sense of reducing the amount of emissions in the atmosphere. But in another sense, some also create these kind of taxes in order to increase their revenues. So these are the two sides of the emission tax: creating revenue and at the same time trying to reduce the amount of emissions in the atmosphere. But the question here is, do they actually achieve the latter, which is the amount of emissions in the atmosphere, or their main aim is to gain the revenue that they are looking for? Thank you.
Okay, Justine, what do you have to add to that?
Thank you very much. And I want to acknowledge the insightful contribution of Dr. Juliana when he took us through an overview of the entire topic for tonight's discussion. What I will add to what my colleague panelists mentioned is these emission tax are normally considered carbon emission. And as he rightly mentioned, most countries actually try to reduce the emission of these carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, which are considered to be hazardous to human health. And that is also a possible effect of on our climate. So in Ghana, when you come to Ghana, the reason for the implementation of this emission tax was to put a levy on the carbon dioxide emission, which is calculated as a sum of a person greenhouse gas emission, and that is expressed as the carbon dioxide equivalent in Ghana city. So Ghana, the aim is to try, when you look at the policy itself, the aim of implementing this levy is to reduce the emission of carbon dioxide. But as my colleague mentioned, the other aspect to it is also to generate revenue. But the question we all have to now be thinking about is that, does this actually help reduce the emission of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere or in the environment? So I think as we discuss, we will come up with questions to this. This is few I will add as we move on.
It actually looks like Nathaniel dropped out. Is that possible? It
I
gave
think
me.
he dropped out, so I think just take it over.
Nathaniel has dropped out.
Yes, it
So
gave me a notification that I'm the host now. So I'm your host now. Welcome.
Thank you.
I believe he will come back online now. Okay, so I will literally jump in. I do have a question for the two of you, actually. I'm very interested to know a bit more about the implementation of this tax. You know, your bureaucracy, or in reality, you know, if now every citizen and every company and every industry needs to report this and calculate their emissions and then, you know, pay this tax. How do you think this will take place? Is this realistic, or is it a big challenge? Please give me some insights.
Okay, thank you, Doc. I think let me take the lead to actually share my opinion on this. If you look at the emission tax levy in Ghana, what I would say is that it's actually going to be difficult, or is difficult to talk about its really realistic effects on the entire economy. For instance, most countries that pass this emission levy as incentive to reduce carbon dioxide emission actually consider the carbon pricing, where we say a price is set on a carbon emission either through a carbon tax or a cap trade, a cap and a trade, as you rightly presented in your statement. But when you come to Ghana, such a policy or such strategy hasn't taken place yet, which is actually going to be difficult for the levy to actually achieve its target. And when you also see there's not any act of also trying to look at emission trading, as you mentioned in your presentation. So some of these key points that are yet to be added or considered about the policy is making the reality or the effectiveness of the policy very, very difficult as we sit now. So what I can say is that as it stands now, this emission policy is very difficult for us to see its effect if policymakers have don't if policymaker hasn't have to consider or go back to the drawing table to really look at some of these initiatives as you presented in your presentation, such as a cap and trade or emission trading, which will be very key to actually help its effectiveness. Otherwise, as we said, the effectiveness of this emission and the way it is being implemented is actually going to be difficult for the country to achieve its target or its aim of implementing the levy. Thank you.
Very
Okay.
much, Justine. At this juncture, I would like to introduce Joshua, who is also going to step in as my co-host, because as I mentioned earlier, we are having some challenge with blackout in some parts of the world, and it affects us as well. In some parts of Ghana, it affects us as well on this meeting. So I need to add another co-host so that if I have any challenge, he can step in for me on this meeting. And so that's very important. The participants, we are discussing our emission tax in Ghana. And if you have any question, you can also drop it in the chat box, and then we'll look at it and then discuss that. So the emission tax has just been passed. In terms of behavioral change, how does this tax impact behavior, or does it have any potential to impact behavioral change when it comes to emission? So I'll take it from Dr. Julia. You can start.
Yes. It is a very complicated question, I think, because yes, it can. I mean, if you imagine you have a large company and you are emitting X amount of tons of carbon per year through your processes, and now you suddenly have to pay this levy. It has a huge impact on you, right? I mean, it's additional costs. It's real. it's in your books. So I believe if you are now the owner or the manager of this company, you will quite likely try to somehow adjust your processes and your production to lower your emissions. So, of course, in an economic way, you know, money is interesting, and having to pay money is very interesting. So that additional cost will definitely have some impact. But then on the other hand, I think human people, I'm saying human people, humans and people are usually a little bit lazy. So, we might get used to this tax very quickly and then just be paying it, but not actually making a real effort to change anything. So it'll affect people. It'll affect some people more. It'll affect some industries more. But I kind of doubt that it would, actually affect a lot of change. Partially, yes, but maybe not enough.
Okay, thank you very much. Justine, if you are part of our panelists, and I don't know if you are affected by the blackout, but if you can put your video on, fine, so that I add you to the spotlight that the participants can see all the speakers on this call. If not, if your video is off, I can add you to the spotlight. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Then, Asamoah, when you talk of behavioral change, because you are in Ghana, and when we are talking about this, somebody can say, okay, I've paid my emission levy, so I can now pollute. So what do you have to say on that?
Thank you very much. As Africans as we are, when we are paying taxes without seeing any outcome from it, it becomes a problem. Again, to looking at the fact that, let's say, some people actually think that the emissions, let's take cars for instance, they are using their cars. They are not seeing any emissions or smoke out of their exhaust. So to them, they are thinking that they are not causing any form of emissions into the atmosphere. So what happens is that people who are paying these taxes can actually change their behavior to the fact that they can actually, that you can change your exhaust and other things. So when they are paying the tax without giving out any smoke out of their cars, then definitely their behavior will change. To the fact that, I don't know if there was this video circulating some time ago when the emission tax was passed. There was this truck and the person was actually accelerating and you can see that there is smoke everywhere. And the person is saying that this is the value of the tax that I'm paying. So definitely when it comes to the vehicles, people are going to change their actions because they can't be paying things that they are not actually producing or causing any effect at the end. Again, to looking at the factories too, let's take it for instance, electricity like this. The emissions that these people cause when they are producing these electricity. The thing is, when they are paying these taxes, they can pass it on to the consumers. When they pass this on to the consumers, that one too becomes another problem. So looking at the emission tax, in my point of view, to some people, it will change their behavior, though not everyone, not we all are the same. But looking at the majority of we Africans, mostly looking at the taxi drivers and the truck drivers, you could see that definitely their behavior is going to change towards this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The emission tax was passed this year on 1st of February. And as part of the objective, we said the tax was passed in response to the tax reforms proposed by the government in the 2024 budget statement and economic policy. It is intended to generate cash to fund various sectors reform while also promoting the green economy in Ghana. So we've taken tax. The government this is not the first tax going to be imposed in Ghana, and the government has taken tax for various activities in the past.
Nathaniel, I think there are some issues.
Can we trust the Justine, can we trust the government? Can we trust the government?
Hello, it seems your question, I didn't get some part. I only heard, can we trust the government?
I'm saying that the government has taken taxes for various activity in the economy. Can we trust the government on the emission tax and the intention of generating cash to fund various sector reform while also promoting green economy? So I'm asking if we can trust the government on this. And I've added you to the, so you can turn off your video if it makes your internet a bit stronger.
Okay, thank you. Yes, from my opinion, and from the context of drawing understanding and looking back to most of the taxes that this government imposed, I would say it's difficult for Ghanaians to trust the government for the aim that they propose or they mentioned as the reason for this emission levy. And even looking at the way the tax is being passed or the way they mention as a measure of calculating the tax base or trying to look at the tax base in how to measure the emission of carbon dioxide, and that is going to be a charge on either a person or a factory. It's actually going to be difficult. So you can just see that it's just a way of trying to raise revenue for the government, but it is a burden to the citizen in general. Why should I say so? If you look at how this tax is passed, it is in a form of more like an indirect tax, as my colleague Samuel mentioned. You could see that for the factories, they are likely, or there's going to be the likelihood of they pushing the burden of the tax to the consumer, and that will affect the poor citizen in the country. Though government is going to get revenue, and as I mentioned, which we can't say for certainty that the aim of reducing emission and then also using it to develop other sectors of the economy, which is also helping to promote green economy, is not going to be a reality from where I sit. But only what I'm seeing from this tax is that it's just going to be a burden on the mere consumer coming from the factory being able to shift this emission levy that they are going to pay to any other person that go in for their products. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Justin, for your submission. All right, Dr. Julia, would you like to comment on what Justin's submission?
Sorry, say that again, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I think so. I hope so. Joshua, are you there?
Yeah, hello.
Yes,
Yeah.
please, could you just repeat what you asked me? I didn't pick the full sentence.
I said what what's your take on what Justin just said on Justin's submission about the behavioral change?
About behavior change.
Yeah.
How to achieve that?
Yeah.
You know what, in my opinion, it's usually very simple if you offer alternatives, right? So if you sort of like don't expect individuals to be very active and be very proactive, but it's almost like you implement the alternatives, right? So say, I don't know which example did we have earlier? For example, a car exhaust, right? So that you somehow offer alternatives that are better, cheaper, you know, whatever benefit they could have, or literally just a choice to have alternatives. I think that's easier to get through if people can see alternatives and they are on the market and they are on offer, instead of them having to search for something. You know, I'm not sure if, you know, I'm a car owner and now I have this levy that I have to pay, which will be a burden, but does it actually make me go look for an alternative? You know, that's where my thinking comes in.
Okay. Joshua, do you have any question to add?
I'll hand over to you as your internet is stable now. As we go on, I'll come in with my questions.
Okay, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you are.
Yes, please.
Participants on the call, we urge that if you have any question, put it in the chat box. It's very, very important. Okay, so with this emission tax, how one of my greatest worry is the calculation of it. You know, how do we calculate it? Because in this part of
Yes.
the world, how is the emission going to be calculated per, and then people are going to be taxed accordingly, if there are any opinion. But first of all, let me quote some portion of the act that says that they are going to give two types of emission, which is the carbon dioxide equivalent emission from specific sectors. And they are looking at construction sector, manufacturing sector, mining sector, oil and gas sector, electricity and heating sector. Then the second aspect is emission from motor vehicles, and this includes motorcycle, tricycle, motor vehicle, buses, and coaches. And we have motor vehicles, buses here, and then we have a cargo trucks and articulated trucks. Now, the first aspect, which is the sectors, they are looking at $8 or 100 cedis per emission per month. So I want to hear your views. How is the calculation going to be? Because I'm driving my car, my smoke is coming out. There is no machine that is calculating what not that is attached to my car, what not. And then once the month end, I'm told I'm supposed to pay something for emission tax. How is it going to be calculated, and how will people feel that they have been fairly treated when it comes to their emission tax, or they are paying the fair rate per their emission, kind of? So who will take it first? So we start with okay, so Doc, you've completed your submission. So I want you to share your opinion on it first, because you are more expert on that on that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not super deep into the climate discussion, but I mean there are international standards of how you can calculate your actual, you know, for example, CO2 equivalents, right? I mean, you'll know the type of engine that car has, the type of fuel it's using. You know, is it diesel? Is it normal fuel? So I think calculation itself is not too much of a trouble in, let's say, scientific or, you know, technical terms, but I'm rather interested in how do you set a price? You know, how high is your levy? Like, why is it, what did you say? Why is it $8? Why is it not 10 or 7, or, you know? So I think explaining that to a consumer, or, well, emitter in that way, that might be very difficult, you know? I think it'll be a bit more straightforward in terms of a bigger industry. So if you have a manufacturing you know, company, they will probably more or less know their own emissions. You know, it's standard to know what your processes are about, etc., etc. But to your citizen, so we are now thinking of actual, you know, vehicle owners, or even, let's say, your city offices that have public transport or something. You know, I think at that point it'll be difficult to explain how that's calculated, and even more so, how do you set that price? That would be actually interesting to me. Now, I would love to know what's
Okay.
your calculation, you know? Where does that come from?
Yeah, the calibration and everything. We want to know that. Justin, do you have any opinion to share on that? Justin. Okay, if you are not hearing from Justin, Asamoah, can you add up?
Okay, so let me add this. Considering the vehicle aspect. So what happens is before a car goes on sale from the manufacturer's place, before it goes on sale, these emissions are being measured before they go on sale. So what happens is that we have something we call a V5C. This V5C is a document which proves that this is
Yes, let me just yes, please. Please,
Okay,
can you hear me?
Justin, Asamoah is on the photo. Can you let him finish so that you come in?
Can I continue?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
speaking. Can you hear from me?
Justin, just hold on for now and then let Asamoah finish and then you continue, okay? Asamoah, if you can hear me,
So,
continue.
okay, so what I was saying is we have what we call the V5C. This is a document which proves who is the registered keeper of a particular vehicle. And this also contains the details of the vehicle that you are using. So what happens is that before the car goes on sale, they check the carbon dioxide emissions of these vehicles before they go on sale. So you find all these informations on the V5C document. So what happens is that what the education is lacking is that people don't really know that these kind of informations can be found on the documents that they are holding when they have full documentations of the vehicle they are using. So I think education should go on for people to get to know that this is where you get to know that you are emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And again, do people think that just because they are not seeing smoke from the exhaust of their vehicles, they think they are not producing carbon dioxide. That's the problem. Because they think that when you see the dark smoke, that's when you are providing emissions into the atmosphere. So I think people should be educated that so far as it's a vehicle and it's using fuel, definitely it's going to release some form of emissions into the atmosphere. So these can be calculated based on the document, which we call the V5C document. And people should be educated on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asamoah. Justin, if you can on your video and start your submission, it will be very great. Then you take it up. Okay, so now you are back in the spotlight, so you can take your video off and continue.
Okay, thank you. Yes, before I went off, I was trying to mention how the tax is going to be calculated as part of the measures put in by the government. Please, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So what the government said they are going to use to measure the tax is that they said the tax is going to be calculated as a sum of a person's greenhouse gas emission. And that is going to be expressed as a carbon dioxide equivalent of Ghana cedi resulting from the fuel combustion of industry processing or industrial processing and fugitive emission. And as Isaac mentioned, each vehicle or when you register has a particular number on it that they can use to at least calculate the emission of carbon or the emission of carbon in the atmosphere. So I think that is what the government is going to leverage much on. And how it will be effective is that I'm just retreating what Isaac mentioned, that there is a need for education to the public that will make them aware that it's just not only cars that are old and then we see them when they are moving, we see smoke that are going to be pay more. But even if your car is not releasing smoke, but you can't be charged based on the registered number that you have, and you should be aware of that. And I think that is what the government may intend to use to measure the emission of carbon and use that to levy individuals.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry.
You want to say something?
Yeah, so the thing is, just what Justine said, that's right. But the thing is, individuals don't have that much education on how these taxes are going to be taxed from them. That is the problem that you are facing right now. Because considering the fact that I don't know how these things are calculated, though not everyone is literate to get to know that this is how the calculation is being done. But what if you've done these calculations, but these figures are being manipulated? How are you going to get to know? That is the problem that we are facing right now. Thank you.
Okay, I think I get that clearly from how you calculate it, and the person who is going to pay doesn't even know. And the tax will be unfairly calculated against them if they are not really educated on that. And thank you very much for adding up, Justin, on that. Now, from Dr. Julius, the entire environment is 5%. And so, and Africa has over 54 states or countries. So if the entire 54 states is 5%, to the entire climate change agenda, let alone to say you are taxing citizens in order to reduce emission. What is the significance? Dr. Julia, can you pick it from there?
Yeah, I didn't pick your entire sentences. You're breaking off a little bit, but I think I got the point. You know what, with my team where I work now at the AFI Institute, that's exactly the debate we are having, and we are seeing across the board with other institutions. Why should Africa or any African country individually even bother to do this, right? And that's what I try to raise and say, you know, what about your development? What about your economic growth? What about et cetera, right? What about your well-being in your countries? Okay, now speaks the ecologist and the very concerned global citizen. I think all of us have to change. It's unfortunately nowadays not anymore about, you know, who did this in the past and who did more and who did less. If you look at climate change, biodiversity loss, the use of resources and all of those, the world is generally going into a very bad direction. So unfortunately, all of us have to act. And yes, I absolutely understand that, you know, Africa is not a big carbon emission, not a big contributor, etc. Yes, that's absolutely true. However, I think for your own future and for your own progress and your own development in your country, it is a good thing to do. There's nothing wrong with going for renewable energies instead of fossil fuel, right? Like it's a positive thing. So why not go for that solution if you have it and if you can implement it? It might in some points even be quicker or cheaper or using less resources or different resources. You might be able to get international funding for all of those, especially in the climate debate. So I think if Africa and African countries are clever, you are going to use exactly that argument and push for finance and push for investments and push for collaborations. So I would love to see people going a little bit away from this, you know, transactional, we did this or we didn't do this, and that's why we are allowed to do A or B or not. but rather just look for those solutions and look for what your benefit is and what's your win. I hope that's a interesting
Okay,
answer.
yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting. So, Justine, with everything that has been said on this emission tax, if you look at the tax clearly, it is focusing on vehicles. However, when we talk of the emission, we know that there are a lot of people use fossil for cooking and other things. Why they didn't capture those individuals as well? The focus was on so Justin, if you look at our way of life, where fossil fuel is the order of the day from our basic economic activities, aside even driving, do you think that the emission levy is holistic enough if we really want to champion green uh, economy in Ghana, for instance?
Well, thank you. I think I got what you maybe trying to bring across. When you look at, I think the government actually focus on cars and then maybe factory because our individuals usage of fossil fuel is actually difficult to get people or those who are actually using. But if you own a car, the car is registered, or you are running a factory or any other industry, it is registered, and then the government can at least use that to charge the levy on you. But looking at its effectiveness and efficiency in tackling greenhouse or in promoting green economy, from where I sit, I would say it's actually not enough, because if you look at what Doc presented, the percentage at which the whole entire Africa continent itself even released is not actually much for a country to be thinking of using a levy or a tax approach to handling or to promoting green economy. So what I might propose is that there should be alternative, as Doc mentioned. Let's look at the emission trading. Let's look at the cap trade system. These are some alternatives that the government, I think we should go back and think through, and then they can easily also help the promotion of green economy more than the approach of the levy that is used currently.
Great. Joshua, do you have any question to ask? Or I should just continue to roll the ball to someone?
Yeah, continue. Let's move on.
Okay, our participants on the call, if you have any question, I think we've already done 1 hour and we should open up for you. If you want to speak, you can unmute and then share your thoughts, and our panelists will be glad to engage it. So let's hear from you. And we'll be also planning to wrap up because we've done 1 hour already. I'm grateful we have come this far because there's blackouts, and also our internet issue is also problematic. And over I think it was last week or something that they said they are giving us theory as to the cables that have been chewed by sharks and whatnot. That's why we are not getting internet connectivity. Doctor, I think you find it a bit weird, but where we are open to all kind of conversations. I know.
I know.
Black.
Maybe I can just add one thought to what Justine just said. A great way forward, I believe, can be, yes, it is a little bit strange for a country to out of the blue, implement a carbon tax where you have so many other challenges, right? So I think going forward, and then also linking to educating citizens, you know, what you can do is you can combine options, you can combine tools, or you can combine your reasons for why you implement something. So for example, if you have, I don't know, a better technology that cuts your carbon emissions, but also helps with health issues, explain that, and combine those reasons and implement it because it has different outcomes at the same time. Different cooking stoves, different energy sources, different, I don't know what different. So I hope it becomes clear what I'm trying to say. I think especially for your population, it might be really weird to understand why you need a carbon tax, like just a levy that now I need to pay, right? Because I'm supposedly polluting the air. But if you, instead of that, rather offer a tool or a technology or something else and explain that it is a win-win for the citizen as well, for their health, for their kids, for their money, for, whatever the reason could be, I think that could actually lead to some bigger behavior change and some, impacts that you want to achieve. So government revenue, carbon emissions are down, etc., etc. So I think sometimes these isolated arguments, or very isolated debates, they are not easy to understand and to implement. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Okay. So I think one of the things that this tax is doing is to create awareness, because it's raising a huge awareness on pollution of the environment.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the great things that the tax is doing.
Yeah, that's true.
We want to know the way forward aside taxation, because honestly, we view taxes differently here. Nobody wants to pay tax, and the ones that are being paid, we don't really see we don't really see what is being used. We have a lot of mismanagement.
Right.
You can name it. All the bad stories of corruption comes from Africa. So what will be the motivation for people to do it if it is coming in the form of tax? And then if not, is there another way that we can make people reduce that pollution without it being necessarily in the form of tax? This one, I'll take submission from everybody. I'll start from someone, then Justin, and then Dr. Julia, you conclude for us.
Okay, so I'll start with there should be some form of stakeholder engagement, because a lot of stakeholders, a lot of advocates and other people are raising concerns to the fact that there were inadequate stakeholder engagement. So I think going forward, there should be some form of an extensive stakeholder engagement. Because if you are taxing, just as you rightly said, we Africans, payment of tax without seeing the value of what we are paying for becomes a problem. So we just need to go ahead with an extensive stakeholder engagement. Again, I do think we should do well and find or advance into some renewable sources just to help us reduce the amount of emissions that we bring out. Just like, let's say, if we increase our solar energy, let's say if we also increase so many other things like electric vehicles, but before all these things come to play, though people have been taxed, their tax has been rolled out. What are we using the money? What are we using the revenue for? For people to understand that this is the way forward. Because even if we are, just as Dr. Julia said, even if we are just venturing into renewable energy sources, and by 2043, still we are producing about 12.6 million emissions, then it's still a problem. It's still a problem. So I do think that you should find all these electric vehicles and make sure that the individuals do get to understand what this is about. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Justine, let's hear from you.
Yes, to add to what Asamoah said, it's actually true that in a nation like Ghana, such a policy actually needs a lot of engagement with stakeholders and other people in order to see how effective and efficient it should go. And as he said, this levy, when it was mentioned, people complaining a lot. And I think the government going forward, they should try in a way of modifying it. They should engage more, or they should hold a lot of stakeholder maybe consultation to see how effective or how efficient we can refine this particular levy, and then it will actually help everyone in the country. And to add to the alternatives, uh, looking at the rate or the level of emission that the entire continent contributes is much less significant. And I would suggest that, yes, this is a policy that is to create awareness about how we can handle our pollution or our climate issues. So we should also think about other innovative way, as someone mentioned. We should be thinking about how we can come out with other initiative or other innovative way of handling our pollution issues in the country, instead of relying on tax where we know that we, the citizen or the people themselves, when we mention anything like tax and we don't see the outcome or the benefit of it, it becomes a problematic issue. So I think the government, in their engagement with stakeholders, we should also be they should also be thinking about some of these new technology that are coming out, that the advanced nations are actually adapting now, for us to be able to also handle our pollution issue going forward. I think it will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I must say that we'll be bringing the discussion to a closure as we are enjoying. But before that, we'll take closing remarks after Dr. Julia share his contribution on the subject matter that is on discussion right now. So, Dr. Julia, you add your submission, then we take last round of closing remarks, and then we call it tonight. Okay.
Yeah. So what I pick from both statements now from my co-panelists, ideally, you will be having this levy and you will be having this carbon tax, and your government should then directly from those revenues invest into new initiatives, and at the same time engage stakeholders, educate your public, prove where the money is going, use it for solutions, use it for innovative startups, use it for some more research or anything like that. So then you would close the circle. You would have your levy that needs to be paid by your citizens, but they can see where the money is going, and it is going into meaningful opportunities. You might create some livelihoods, you might reduce some health issues, you might increase some education, etc., etc. And then you're creating that circle that I think would ideally be very meaningful.
Okay, that is great. If we have any closing remarks, I'm sure we are enjoying the discussion, but we are also extending our conversation as well. We are discussing free marketing, climate policy, and how effective is Ghana's emission tax. We've come very far with our panelists and we are discussing. So at this juncture, I will call on them. Maybe they can give us the way forward. I think the way forward in their remarks will be also appreciated. We'll note the education bit as well, because the population I think if you chance on this discussion, you learn a lot, but there is more that needs to be done. So in the closing remarks, I would like to hear from you if you have any thoughts on that. I want to start with Asamoah. Let's go, and then we'll end with Dr. Julia as well.
Okay. So the payment of tax isn't a problem, but our approach that government takes to issue these taxes on citizens becomes the problem. Because looking at our energy levy that was passed in Act 2021, there are some form of sanitation and pollution levy on petrol and diesel, which accrued about 452 million Ghana cedis as 2022. But yet, these prices of fuels and other things are increasing. That is a problem. What I do think is that we as a country should make sure that if a certain objective is attached to a certain policy or tax, we should make sure that we should gear, if not all, much of the revenue accumulated from these taxes towards what the exact objective is. Because looking at the objective of this tax, trying to decrease the emissions in the country, that means that we should make sure that the amounts that are being accumulated should be accounted for. There should be transparency in the amounts that are accumulated. And these amounts, what they are being used for, should be made known to the public, and there should be some form of effect on the citizens. Thank you.
Okay, just for me to also add my closing remark. What I would say is that the levy or the implementation of the levy is actually a way of handling green or carbon dioxide emission and promoting green economy. But what we should look at now is that, yes, the policy has been implemented, but there is no market mechanism. What I mean is that as a policy has been passed, but as it stands now, there is still no national carbon pricing or emission trading scheme yet, which is actually even making the entire levy understanding very difficult in the country. And the effectiveness side, as we stand now, it is difficult for us to isolate the impact of the policy on emission reduction so far. So what I would say is that the government going forward, we should really think about this. What is the national carbon pricing or emission trading scheme? They should come out with it clearly, let the public know about it. And how can we now even measure or isolate the impact of this levy on emission reduction? And I think this will be a good way for us to appreciate the payment of the levy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll take our last remarks from Dr. Julia.
I would actually like to close with a few questions because, you know, what we've raised are actually quite some big challenges. You know, you are talking about corruption, possible corruption. You are talking about educational issues. You're talking about transparency. So the way forward, you know, there are many should be's and should do, but then who is going to implement that way forward? So my question rather is, what is it that you can do, you here on the call, you know, the younger generation? Now, how can you achieve this transparency? How can you make those emissions figures public and the levy figures public, and, you know, possibly lack of proper use of those revenues, etc. I think I think that's already a very big win if, you know, the younger people in a country are pushing on that, because who else is doing it otherwise? You know, there's an agenda behind a lot of those happenings, and there are people involved pushing those agendas. So yeah, I don't really have an answer. I rather have questions. You know, how can you guys proceed and, yeah, sort of support achieving all of those things, which is very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Dr. Julia. Joshua, do you have any last words to say as we end our meeting?
Yeah, this nice policy dialogue has been an educative one, and we all have known how these taxes are going to affect our emissions. With all the submissions that came, they have educated us on what to expect from this new emission tax. Thank you.
Okay, so at this juncture, I would like to thank our panelist, Dr. Julia Samoa and Justine, for making time out to join today's discussion. We urge our listeners to continue following Yafo Institute so that we can continue to bring you the most educative and authentic policy dialogue that is devoid of political biases, but rather focus on research and has more in-depth into analyzing the issues so that we can really appreciate it from a very scholarly point of view. So we thank you all, and if you want to stay updated for more events from Yafo Institute, you can visit our website. That's yafoweb.org. yafoweb.org. At this juncture, would like to thank you all.
I think Nathaniel is off again, so let me take it out from here. We would like to thank you all for making tonight's dialogue a success. We thank you, Dr. Julia, for your time, and we hope to have another insightful event with you in the future. Thank you very much to all our panelists and to our listeners. Without you, this tonight's event wouldn't have been very much insightful like that. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you too.
Thank you too. It was a pleasure.
Nathaniel. All right.
I want to end the live stream